And I think we're live. Good evening, Hearts of Oak supporters. Welcome to another live stream. And this evening we have a guest who we've had on before, who was going to join us for our conference on Saturday. That didn't work out, so we asked him to come on and join us this evening. So Jay, thank you so much for giving us your time this evening.
Listen, it's great to be with you, both of you. You're good friends for many years.
Good to have you with us, Jay. Very good. So we're looking forward to hearing you on Islamophobia. That'll be a rich one, that will. But anyway, yeah.
Before we launch into our discussion, I just want to let our viewers know that today I've been braving the cold of Luton, standing outside Luton Magistrates Court, and that was because Tommy Robinson was there, being tried for. I'll put the video out. We put a snippet out today, so I will get that edited and up by about 9:30 this evening. Apologies, I just got in about 40 minutes ago, so it went on much longer than any of us expected. You've probably seen we've already put up what the result was, that he was found guilty, but it wasn't given a custodial sentence, so at least he went home. But I'll put all that up. It's about 15-18 minutes of footage from today, including chatting to him before he went in and getting him as he exited the course and talked to those supporters waiting. So yeah, I'll put that up later this evening. So just let you know that's coming. But back to this evening with Jay. Jay, our conference was titled Jackboot Britain, and it's because of the restrictions that we are all facing in our civil liberties because of COVID. Many restrictions that we never imagined would be in place at the beginning of this year. People would have been laughed at if they had mentioned that you would be paid to stay at home. That's how strange the world has become. But the restrictions we face, you have faced many restrictions, and that is on the issue of Islam. And we've titled this Jackboot Britain Islamophobia. So do you want to first, let's open up the term Islamophobia, and then let's go back and talk about how that's restricted your public debates, academic research. I mean, there are a huge lot of areas. So just tell us first, what exactly does it mean, Islamophobia?
Well, obviously, the word itself, you unpack it, means fear of Islam, which is a rather ironic term, since those of us who are confronting Islam have no fear whatsoever of Islam per se. What we do fear is our freedoms being hijacked and restricted. That fear there is certainly a phobia, because we've seen this happening. And I think in my case, I've seen it happening in the last 20 years, going back when I first came to Britain in 1992. As you can see, I'm an American, and I was asked to come to help out with confronting radical Islam, this radical group that are here on the right, that are probably the ones who are doing the most damage to the whole world. I mean, you can hold the whole litany of these groups. And in England, that was a real problem, especially in London, in the city of London, where you have people like Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad and Anjem Chowdhury, who I became good friends with. And whenever there was a debate in the 1990s, whenever there was a debate that was being planned on any of the university campuses, what tended to happen was the Islamic Society would challenge the Christian Union to a debate on a certain topic. And the Christian Union didn't know how to debate this topic because they just weren't aware of much of the agenda of Islam. And so they would call me. And so I would come, and I did debate after debate after debate. And I think for the 1990s up until the beginning of the 2000s, there was really no one else that was doing these debates. And I was campus after campus: Manchester University, Leicester University, King's College, London School of Economics, School of Oriental and African Studies. I would go to all these different schools, and I would either go to meetings that Muslims were putting on, like Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad, and then confront Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad in public, or that I would be called on to do these debates on these different topics. And that ran fine, and we had great crowds, and we had enormous crowds. Then after 9/11, 2001, everything seemed to change. And at this time, then, the word Islamophobia had already been introduced. I think, I'm not sure the year it was actually introduced. It was introduced there in Britain around the late 1990s. Do you know what the date when it was introduced? Either of you two?
I don't know. Was it the Runnymede Trust? I don't know what date it was.
Runnymede Trust, and I think it's 1997. I may be wrong on the date, but it was just prior to the 9/11 attacks. And after the 9/11 attacks, there was a fear in Britain, and it's not just in Britain, it's all over, that there would be a reaction. There would be a sudden upstrike of violence against Muslims. Isn't that interesting? Against Muslims. And so Islamophobia became the term that was used by the pundits there on media, by your government, certainly by academic institutions, so that from 9/11 or 2001 on, it became more and more difficult for me to even go on campus. So to the point that by 2010, I was not allowed on any campus to argue about anything that was against Islam. Muslims continue to have free reign. They could come onto any campus and argue against Christianity, against the Bible, against Jesus, against our history. You name it, they did it. Nobody restricted them. There was no such thing as Christianophobia. That word didn't even exist. It still doesn't exist. We don't need a word like that to defend ourselves. Islam uniquely needs a word to defend it because it could not take these kind of confrontations, this kind of material that we were introducing, and a lot of it was historical material. So that happened on the university campuses. Meanwhile, I had been down at Speaker's Corner, and I remember I first went to Speaker's Corner in 1992 when I first got there. And for 25 years, I would go down to Speaker's Corner. You all know where it is. It's right there in Hyde Park. Alan, you've been on the ladder with me there at Speaker's Corner, so we've engaged with Muslims, and we realized that most everywhere we went, whether it was on university campuses, which got shut down, then we went to high streets where we put out book tables, those got shut down. Everywhere we went, we got shut down just for asking historical questions. Did the Quran exist? Was there a manuscript in the 7th century? Who is this? Where is this Uthmanic recensions? These kind of questions are perfectly legitimate questions, should be perfectly legitimate questions in any academic institutions, but we could not bring it out on university campuses, which is fascinating, and then we could not bring it out on the streets. So the only place that was left us was Speaker's Corner, the bastion of freedom of speech. I've been told, and I still agree, it is probably the bastion of freedom of speech, though that is now been eroding. And you saw what happened to Tommy Robinson a few weeks ago when he came down there to support Hatun Tash. So here we went to Speaker's Corner, which I had been going for 25 years, and we started introducing this brand new material that I first heard about in 1995. And I got beat up. Physically beat up. I got my glasses broken. You can see where they try to open up my throat here at one time. And in every time that I got beat up or I got knocked off the ladder, you get on a ladder so you can get your head above the crowd so you can introduce your material. The police who were there would take me aside and they would blame me for being beat up. And they were saying, it was your material, it's your rhetoric, you need to stop saying this. And I said, well, hold on a minute, this is Speaker's Corner, the one place we should be allowed to ask these kind of damaging questions. And they were damaging. Listen, I don't agree. I agree. I have no problem with the idea that what we were doing was highly confrontational. When you say that there is no mosque facing Mecca until 727, and Muhammad died in 632. When you say that none of these mosques are facing Mecca, they're all facing a city called Petra, which means you have a real problem with the historical narrative of how Islam began. When you're saying that you can't find one reference to a man named Muhammad in any of the 7th century documents until 692, and when you say you can't find any reference to a city called Mecca until 741, you can imagine that's confrontational. Because that shuts down any notion that there was a man named Muhammad or a place called Mecca or even a Quran that it supposedly was given to him from the 7th century. Now, I can understand why the Muslims got upset, and so that's why they started using this word Islamophobia to shut me down. And then, of course, right along with that, hate preacher. What is hateful about the things I'm asking? How can this be hate preaching when this was asked of Christianity? We've had this asked of Jesus Christ. We've had the same questions asked about our Bible. Way back in the 1800s, they were asking these kind of questions. And these are perfectly legitimate questions to ask of any scripture and any historical figure. And remember, both Muhammad and Jesus are historical figures. They lived in history at a certain place, doing certain things at a certain time, and we can ask about those places, those times, and the things they did. That should be open to every discussion, should be open to everyone, everywhere, if we really believe in freedom of speech. That's why we don't even suggest creating a name called Christianophobia. And then around 2006, 2007, this incitement to religious hatred law came in. You all remember that?
Yeah.
Well, they tried to bring it in, and it went back and forth between the House of Lords and the House of Commons 3 times. Finally, it was brought back for the 3rd time in the House of Commons to vote on it. And this law stipulated that if anybody criticized the Quran or criticized Muhammad, it would be 7 years in prison. In Britain. Ironically, in Britain. It was argued. How would you even argue this? But nonetheless, they had a vote. They put it to a vote. And it lost by 1 vote. 1 vote.
I remember that.
And whose vote was that? That was Tony Blair's vote. Remember that? He stepped outside when he realized that it would go against him, and it was the Labour Party that was introducing this vote. They knew that this would go against him. That would mean anybody who criticized Muhammad in public or criticized the Quran in public would have to be thrown in jail. I would have to be thrown in jail because that's all I do. I confront both Muhammad and the Quran. I have for almost, you're going on about 38 years now. And I was outside the House of Parliament when that was being voted. Had that gone through, you can see what would have happened. I would have been thrown in prison, or I would have been thrown out of Britain. And you can see this would have shut down any debate, any discussion about both Muhammad and the Quran. Can you understand how idiotic this law would have been? How can you have a law that stipulates you can't criticize the Book of the Man of Islam when you're allowed to criticize the Book of the Man of Christianity? We allow everybody to criticize Jesus in the Bible. Please, we want them to criticize it because both Jesus and the Bible stand up to criticism. And they're the only ones that do stand up to criticism. I can now understand why the Muslims want to shut this down, because this is the law they use all over the Muslim world. This is the C-295 law that is used in Pakistan to discriminate against Christians and Shiites, and has almost brought many Christians to their death just because they have bothered to say one thing critical about one book and one man. So this idea of Islamophobia, this idea that we're somehow hate preaching, to me is anathema. Because there should be, if we live in a free society, we should be able to be critical of anyone, any place, anything, any event, and certainly any religion, especially any religion, provided we don't use hate speech. Now show me anything that I have done that's called hateful. No, I love these guys and these gals. How can you call this hate speech when I have spent almost 40 years of my life trying to bring them back to Jesus Christ, trying to help them understand they've got the wrong book, they've got the wrong man, they've got the wrong God.
Jay, would you distinguish between, there isn't such a word, but Islamophobia and Islamophobia, in the sense that hatred of Muslims is, although Muslims don't accept it, it is separate. If you hate Muslims because they're Muslims, just because they're Muslims, that is not acceptable. If you hate Islam because it's a false ideology or whatever you happen to think about it, that's something separate. Do you ever draw a distinction between the two? Or
yes, and that's a good point that you're bringing up. And it's fascinating. Why didn't they use that as the word? Muslamophobia makes sense. I do not want to hate Muslims any more than I want to hate Christians or Jews or atheists or humanists. There's no such thing. There's no such thing of attacking or confronting what they believe and suddenly applying that to the person. And that has been where the mistake is. And you're right, Alan, for bringing that up. They assume that when we are confronting the book, the Quran, and confronting the man Muhammad, that we're confronting all Muslims, and that is anathema. They don't want people to confront Muslims. Listen, I have no problem with that. I don't confront Muslims unless they say idiotic things. Then I just say, that's an idiotic statement you just made, or that's a historical. But that's not still confrontation. That's perfectly legitimate in any type of debate. We must be able to even confront a person what they're saying something that just doesn't make sense, or confronting the idea that they're coming up with. But that's still not phobia, and I think we need to make a distinction between confronting the person and confronting the idea.
But isn't that a Western concept? I mean, it comes from the Enlightenment and so on, that actually separate, or the Christian concept. You know, you hate the sinner, but not, you hate the sin, but not the sinner. And an Enlightenment, we can separate the argument from the person, whereas they don't come from that sort of culture. I mean, I'm a Muslim, so if you attack me, you're attacking. If you attack Islam, they would argue you're attacking the inner me.
Well, I would suggest that does not come from the Enlightenment. That actually comes from the Bible itself. Jesus says that very clearly, that we are to forgive 70 times 7. We are to forgive the person. But he says we are not to forgive the practice. So that's why so much of his preaching and his teaching, his parables, were about the denigration of God, the denigration of what the Jews were doing, the Pharisees, and how they had denigrated the place of worship, and how they had denigrated the act of worship. So that's why I think if Jesus made that as a distinction, why aren't we making that as a distinction? Good point, Alan. Well said.
Okay, fine.
Jay, obviously there's a distinction between the debates you've had in the public sphere, and we'll go on to those debates in academic circles, that critique. But if we stay at the moment in that public debate, how did it affect you when you were in Speaker's Corner week in, week out, and now Hattunis? How did you see a change in how people accept that? Did you see the word Islamophobia used to shut down that open and free debate, or how did you see the term begin to remove that level of free debate, which maybe you had at the beginning, and then maybe that was eroded away? Or did you see a change over the years in your time at Speaker's Corner?
Yeah, and to be fair, back in the 1990s, the violence against us was much greater than the violence we're getting now. There was no concept of Islam being a religion of peace back in the 1990s. That was introduced almost overnight in 2001 after the 9/11 debacle, and because of that, it has made it a lot easier to actually confront Islam head on at Speaker's Corner. However, that is now changing. And it has changed primarily in the last 3 years. Now, I've been gone from Speaker's Corner for the last 3 years. I moved back to the States in 2017. Hatun Tash has taken that over. But just let's use her as an example. Have you had her on your show yet?
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Please
Indeed,
do.
yeah.
Because she is exemplary of what the problem is with the whole concept of Islamophobia. Here is a woman just 5'2" who spends the time confronting the Quran and Muhammad, the very two things. She was on my team. I trained her up. We were on the ladder for 3 years together. She was right next to me every Sunday on the ladder. And yet this woman has been beaten up. She's had her ribs broken. She's had her foot broken. They strung her up. They almost snapped her neck by being hanged. And she never once mentioned it in public. Never once. We know about it because we were there. We saw her. She was being healed. And then she comes to Speaker's Corner, 6-7 weeks ago, maybe it's almost 2 months now. I can't remember the exact date, and was holding up a Quran with holes in it that she had drilled through, symbolically referring back to what we know as the holes in the narrative that was that infamous interview that happened on June 8th with Yasser Qadi and Mohammed Hijab. And she has been at the forefront of that debate. That debate has been That debate was first introduced back in 2016 at Speaker's Corner when Hatun and I held up those 26 different Qurans, what we know as Qira'at and Ahruf. So here she is. She is the one that introduced that debate. She is the one that has did all the work on finding the evidence for all these Qurans, 26 of them that she found by 2016. Now she's up to 37 of these different Arabic Qurans. And so here comes a horde of Muslims, 2 months ago, who we think around 200. I think many of them had come from Birmingham, and they waited for the police to come. If you look at the video, you can see they waited for the police to come, and they suddenly surrounded her and started yelling things, throwing things at her. She only had 2 men around her who were not even her bodyguards. They were just 2 men who were Christians who kind of protected her before the police could come and surround her. And as they surrounded her and started moving her over to the car, the Muslims were yelling, "Kill her, kill her, kill her." That's all on film. You can go up on Pfander Films and see it. Now, she was blamed for that and then told by the police not to come to Speaker's Corner again. She was blamed for that. And I have to sit there and think, hold on a minute. You're blaming the victim here. She wasn't asking for any violence. She was only one woman. She didn't even have people on her team to surround her. The 2 guys that were surrounding her to protect her were not part of her team. And yet she is the one that's got blamed. Not one of those Muslims who are on film yelling, "Kill her, kill her," have been extradited, have been incarcerated, or haven't even been looked at. And then a number of weeks later, a Muslim comes and hits her face, knocks her out, breaks her glasses, and he is let go. And again, she is blamed for it. This idea that somehow we, the victims, are the ones that actually are causing the offense is just turning logic on its head. I've never seen this kind of logic that has now gone completely awry. Now, since that event of 3 or 4 weeks ago where she got knocked unconscious for 4 minutes, the police have gone to her home and told her that, told the people where she was staying that they can no longer protect her or them, and she's had to leave her home. She is homeless at the moment. She is homeless. And where have the police been? The police have blamed her for it. They have pretty much said that she is one that is causing this violence. They haven't called her Islamophobic. No, to be fair, it's the Muslims that have said she's Islamophobic. How can you be Islamophobic for holding up a Quran with holes in it that symbolizes the narrative of holes in the narrative? I mean, what better symbol than that itself? Now, there are many people that have come to me and said, Jay, she needs to stop holding up that Quran. She also held up the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. And she did that because she wanted people to realize that this is a freedom of speech matter. This is a matter of freedom of speech. Why is it that we are not permitted to hold up the Charlie Hebdo cartoons at Speaker's Corner, the bastion of freedom of speech, and a crown with holes in it at the bastion of freedom of speech, if we cannot do it here, and the police cannot protect us, and the police then blame us for it, and then the police say that we now have to leave our home and also have to leave Speaker's Corner? Why, if we cannot do it here, what is next? This is the thin edge of the wedge. But this is a huge thin edge of the wedge, because once you have shut down Speaker's Corner and given in to the Muslims, do you see what they're doing? They're giving into the Muslims. Now the Muslims know that if Hutton were to stop going to Speaker's Corner, if she would stop holding up that Quran, if she would stop holding up those Charlie Hebdo cartoons, the Muslims know that they would have won, number two, and they know that anytime any of us say anything that they do not like, they can only, all they need to do is yell Islamophobia, hate preacher, and then threaten violence. That's all they need to say. Threaten violence, kill him, kill her, and the police will shut us down. So Speaker's Corner has no longer become a bastion of freedom of speech anymore. And remember, that has been the bastion of freedom of speech for 160 years. Are we going to see it now shut down because Muslims there in London, many of them have come to our country to get away from the very restrictions they have in their own countries, the one last place where we can still speak freely and be critical about freedom of speech, something as simple as freedom of speech. If that is even shut down, then I say England has lost the battle, and so have your police lost the battle, and so have your politicians. And I think this is a real test right now that you are all in. Are you going to pass this test? Are you going to shut down this hatred? Really, the hatred is coming from one direction and only one direction. Nothing Hatun has said is hateful. Nothing that I can see is hateful. She always introduces the gospel at the end of every one of her talks. Even when she was not unconscious, what did she do when she got back up again? Did she talk about that incident once? No. She went right back to Deuteronomy 18 and basically went back to what she was talking about, that you cannot find Muhammad's name in Deuteronomy 18. God bless her. What an example of what we're supposed to do. That is what Speaker's Corner is about. It is not a place for hatred. It is not a place for beating people up. It is a place for speaking and talking and debating and discussing, and yes, even defending Deuteronomy 18, her own Bible.
At a level, Jay, though, the freedom of speech is even more under attack now under the whole COVID thing, whereby those that advocate against lockdown, those that advocate against COVID and want to redefine it and so on, they themselves now are being closed down. They're being closed down by American corporations like Twitter and YouTube and so on. They're governing the debate around that. So the thing which was originally the biggest problem was about Islam is now actually a bigger, wider problem. And there are many more things you can't talk about. You have to be very careful what you talk about on the whole trans debate as well. Otherwise, you'll be closed down. You'll be deplatformed. You'll be a hate speaker or preacher or whatever it is. Islam has almost been overtaken as an issue around this. Then the control of our conversation, the control of what you can say, the control of what you can think these days, the control of what you can discuss in a dinner party in your own home is becoming more and more. So in many ways, you are the sort of opening gambit of this whole Islam and yourself and what you went through, the opening gambit of something that's actually much bigger and wider now. And that's why we called our conference on Saturday Jackboot Britain, because it's being freedom is being crushed on all fronts now. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of assembly and so on being crushed on all fronts, not just about Islam. But Islam almost led the field, and certainly in the days you were here. Jade, can you say, why do you think it was, in those early days, why do you think it was that Islam managed to get this privileged position? I remember seeing Piers Morgan, I don't know if that means anything to you, but he's one of the sort of his breakfast shows, Piers Morgan. He was interviewing Tommy Robinson. And Tommy Robinson was castigating the Quran. He held up a Quran on breakfast television, held up the Quran. And I can't remember Piers Morgan's exact words, but how can you be but something like, how can you be so disrespectful towards a holy book or something like that? And suddenly Piers Morgan has become all pietistic. The great Piers Morgan, who lets nobody off a hook. If he'd held up a Bible, you know very well. I've absolutely seen. We've all seen Piers Morgan attacking Christians, what he would call fundamentalist Christians who believe in the Bible. He attacks them quite happily. But suddenly Tommy Robinson holds up the Quran. Why is it Piers Morgan tells Tommy he should have more respect for this sacred book, this holy book, because it's the Quran? Have you got any explanation for that?
Yeah, I do have an explanation. I saw it happen firsthand with me and Peter Thatchell. You know who Peter Thatchell is?
Yeah.
Well, he was doing a debate with a Christian I think it was a Christian at the Oxford Union. And I went to that debate. And afterwards, we all had something to drink. And so I went up to Peter and I said, it's fascinating that you really came down really strong and you did a brilliant job of really confronting the Christian in front of you. And then I said, it's the Christians who are not really are the problem here. It's really the Muslims who are the problems. Would you be willing to do the same debate against a Muslim? And he said, he just kind of rolled his eyes, says, absolutely not. I said, well, why not? He says, because at least Christians won't kill you. And that's where the penny dropped. And I saw clearly. Remember, what's happening here is a fear of Islam. There is a fear of Muslims. Islamophobia is what has really come to pass here. The Muslimophobia that you referred to about 10 minutes ago, Alan, is what I see is now infecting your politicians. It's affecting your, as you say, Piers Morgan, who's now your celebrities, who are your newscasters and entertainers. It's affecting your schools. There is a fear of Muslims, not of Islam. There's no fear of Islam. Why should we fear Islam? It's the fact that Muslims, when you attack one book and one man, they will do death threats. They will give death threats and they will carry it out. Remember, who are the ones who are killing people on your streets? Are Christians killing people?
But people would say that's a bit of a generalization, Jay. Not all Muslims are like that, are they?
Absolutely. But it only takes one to kill what 52 people, four to kill 52 people. Remember, it's the fact that Muslims, when they threaten, they don't even have to carry out the attack. Look at the teacher in France who held up those Charlie Hebdo magazines. The students didn't attack him. The parents didn't attack him. They yelled at him, but no one really killed him. It was a guy that came from another city that took a bus and came down just to kill him because of what he heard on YouTube. That's the difficulty. And see, there's no Christian that will do that. Have you heard of any Christian hearing something against Jesus Christ or against our Bible that then takes a bus and goes and beheads the person that said it on, in this case, in just a classroom? Have you heard of any incident of that happening? Can you name one? But when a Muslim, when you do that to Islam, and you don't even have to know the person, you don't even have to have said it to that person, you could be killed. Just like that French teacher just about a month ago. It's that scares people. Remember, Alan, you must remember this when we were going to bring what's his name, Geert Wilders, to the House of Lords. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Lord Pearson. Yeah, and we flew him into Heathrow Airport, and he was stopped there at Heathrow Airport so that he could show his film Fitna there at the House of Lords, just a 50-minute film. They turned him back and sent him back to Holland. And that night, because of the fact that he wasn't there to introduce his film, though we introduced it, I went on BBC television that night. What's his name? I can't remember the Home Minister who was the one that was responsible. He came on the show with me, the Indian fellow. His name will come to me. But Kirsty Walk was the one in charge of the program that night. And I was there. She turned to me, and the minister who was going to come in to argue as to why he threw Geert Wilders out of Britain, she was going to take his side. She told me, I'm going to really confront you on this. Why should we not get rid of people who are sowing hate? And the first question she asked this Home Minister was, have you watched the movie? He says, no, I don't need to watch the movie. And immediately she just turned her whole emphasis and she started confronting. How can you throw someone out of Britain, a seating member of Parliament, out of a member state? Holland is a member state of the European Union. This has never been done before, and you haven't even watched the movie that you say that you're incriminating him with. And Kirsty and I just went and took on this fellow immediately. It was brilliant. And that showed me that one man, remember what the reason why Herod was thrown out is because Lord Ahmad there in the House of Lords said, if you bring him here to the House of Lords, I will have 10,000 Muslims standing outside. And we will be demonstrating against the House of Lords. Now, he didn't know whether we brought Herod or not, because he wasn't even there in the House of Lords. When we introduced the film, this hadn't even gone in the news yet. No one had heard about whether or not he'd been sent back to Holland or not. How many Muslims were outside the House of Lords? 0. There was not one Muslim demonstrating. All Lord Ahmad had to do was threaten it. He just had to threaten 10,000. And immediately your government completely collapsed. Gave into it, and they had to send a House of, in this case, a sitting member of Parliament from Holland back to his country. Now, that had never been done before. They had to shut down precedents. And that's why, for me, this shows to me that there is a fear of Muslims. There is a fear of their threats. All you need to say is, we will have 10,000 demonstrated, or we will kill you if you say this in public. And we, the ones who are saying it, don't have to do it. They know the lone wolves will do it for them.
I wonder if it's more than that, Jay. It may not just be physical threats of violence, but also the political costs or political consequences of criticizing Islam. Somehow, Islam or Muslims, they clearly are seen as an ethnic minority. And therefore, it's very easy for people to say, if you criticize Islam or criticize Muslims, you're racist. And no politician wants to have that hung on them. So even if they're not called Islamophobic, they can be called racist because they're criticizing an ethnic minority. That's how Islam is seen. You and I know it's actually a political ideology, a religious ideology, but it's seen as an ethnic minority. Islam is an ethnic minority religion, therefore you're racist if you criticize.
Oh, I would agree with that, Alan. Yeah, I say that is true, but there's something more than that, Alan. That this. I don't see that problem with, you can be critical of Hindus, you can be critical of Sikhs. There are documentaries, quite a few documents against Sikhs and the problem they have within Sikhism. I know there's one that just came up this last year. I don't hear anybody saying racism whenever you're critical of Sikhs or other people or Buddhists. That you can be critical of even Jews. And I mean, there's all kinds of people you can be critical of that could have used that tag racism, yet you don't hear it. It's only with Islam that this is brought up, which suggests to me there's something deeper and there's something much more fearful about Islam. And I would suggest that this has an awful lot to do with the fact that you could be killed for what you say. If somebody as simple as a high school teacher can be beheaded in the street, and there's nothing really the police can do about it by someone who didn't even know him, then you can understand why this is pervasive right across the board. Nobody wants to say anything critical of Islam now because of this fear of retribution.
Jay, I've noticed in the media, and I don't know why it's only dawned on me recently, but when you read about a story on Islam, they will always talk about the Prophet Muhammad. So taking that understanding and putting forward the belief that he is a prophet, and therefore the author identifies himself as a Muslim in effect because they are taking that side. But never once have I read a story about Christians where it talks about the Savior Jesus. It never identifies Jesus as who is claimed to be by Christians, but it always identifies Muhammad by who he is claimed to be. So whenever I guess people read that begins to go into people's heads, and they automatically think Muhammad the prophet, but they would never identify themselves as closely whenever Jesus is mentioned.
Yeah, good point. I had never thought of that before. That's a great way of putting it up, Peter. I think it goes beyond just that. Take a look at the fact that if you can burn Bibles on television, you can burn Bibles publicly and no one says boo about it. You burn a Quran and what happens? You have riots all over the Muslim world, and almost everybody in the Western world shuts you down and will not let you come on their programs and won't even let you come into their countries. Look at the fact that now Robert Spencer cannot come into Britain. Why can't he come into Britain? Because he wrote 5 books that were critical of Islam. He didn't burn any Qurans. He didn't desecrate any Qurans, and yet he's not allowed into Britain. So this is unique to Islam again. Again, it just supports what we've been saying. There's something about Islam that we'll bend over backwards to support it, and give it its authenticity. Whereas in the case like you just brought up, they will always use the term Prophet Muhammad. They will never use Savior Jesus. There's a double standard there. You're right.
Talking about, I wanted to talk about the academic side. Obviously, we have Islamophobia used to shut down general free speech and discussion in the media and the public space. But obviously that has had and continues to have a big impact on academic research. So, for instance, those who are studying Islam not having access to older Qurans, not having access to many things, and not being allowed to actually look and study, where your recent research seems to suggest that actually scholars are now being given access and they're finding discrepancies. So how has the issue of Islamophobia, how has that affected scholarly debate and research up to now, and has that change happened to give you more access recently?
Now you're coming close to home now, and this is where I'm a little fearful of saying too much of what I do know but don't want to say. It's this is the difficulty that I'm having. If I say too much, then the Muslims will shut down the very things I'm talking about as anecdotes. I cannot use too many anecdotes in this case. Now, isn't that ironic that I cannot use anecdotes and I can't even tell you about what I know is going on or who's doing what research? The people who are doing the research on the manuscripts, let's take that for instance. The ones who are doing research on the manuscripts cannot even say who their names are right now and dare not publish what they now know. They feed me material with the understanding that I don't use their names and I don't use their research. Isn't that fascinating? So what area of study that you know of in academia where you are not permitted to quote from the original sources, you are not even able to go to those original sources unless you have a relationship with the people who own those original sources, like in this case, manuscripts. And in order to maintain that relationship, you cannot say anything critical about that material that you're researching. Wow. Only in Islam do you have that problem. That is unique to Islam. So talk about Islamophobia. It is rampant all over the Muslim world. Listen, I know of 5 different PhD candidates who I know personally, I'm not going to give you their names, who have been studying Islam and who have written a critical analysis of the areas they are studying. And in order for them to get their PhDs, they had to rewrite their thesis, take out all the criticism so that they could pass their PhDs.
Wow. And
then once they finished, only then could they write then their secular book or for secular publishing. But even they still won't do it. And all except for one of them, 4 of them will not write what they now know about that which they research, just because they want to continue to do their research in that area. Since they, when you spend an awful lot of time getting a PhD, you want to make sure you're an expert in that area, but you have to have access to the original documents, especially manuscripts. And they cannot have access to those documents if they say anything critical. Since when have we done that with the Bible? Show me. Since when have the Hindus done that with the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas? Nobody. I don't know of any other area of academia where what you know and what you say not only can kill you, but also can shut down your research and shut down your whole career, except Islam. So it's pervasive all over the Muslim world. Listen, you know someone that I'm talking about, a girl who did her doctorate on a certain area of Islam that was absolutely heinous. And yet when she went to publish it, when she went to give her doctoral thesis, she was almost thrown out of the institution. And that happened in Britain. That happened in your country. Until this day, she has not written what she has found on this particular subject. I can't even name what the subject is because that would identify who she is. That's heinous to me, that every area of criticism of Islam is now coming under the rubric. Now, just look what happened last week, Thursday. Yasser Qadhi. I don't know if you all saw the video he put up on Thursday morning. He put a video up. It's gone to 30,000 people have watched it now on his site. 51-minute video where he attacked me, he attacked David Wood, and he attacked Dan Brubaker. 3 of us. We all have doctorates, right? Dr. J. Smith, Dr. David Wood, and Dr. Dan Brubaker. We all have doctorates. What did he say about Dan Brubaker's doctorate? How can you trust this man? Because he got his doctorate at a Western institution, which is not viable in Islamic context. He was attacking Rice University. And then about 2/3 of the way through the video, he even attacked Yale University, where Yasser Qadhi got his own doctorate from. And he says these dangerous universities where they're daring to question, he says where they're daring, these are dangerous institutions. What he was saying is any Western institution where they don't have a red line. Remember the red line that he introduced back in June 8th. He says we have a respect for the Quran and we don't go beyond that. We don't ask certain questions of the Quran. That's our respect. We have a red line. But in the West, at Yale University, at these academics, there are no red lines. Well, that is actually a good thing. Don't you think that we don't have red lines in our Western institutions? And then he turned to Muhammad Hijab and says, you in the East, where there are these red lines, you don't have it as hard as I have it. I have to live in the West. I'm here from Houston. I had to go to Yale University where there are no red lines. And I had a crisis. And Muhammad says, is that where you had your crisis of faith? No. I had a crisis of knowledge. Absolutely. That crisis of knowledge happened 25 years ago, and after 25 minutes of Muhammad Hijab imploring, what are you going to write in my hand? Here's a blank piece of paper. What are you going to write there? He could not answer that question even after 25 minutes because that crisis of knowledge he had at Yale University is still with him, and he admitted in that interview that this crisis that Muslim scholars have today has been around for 1,000 years, and yet they still haven't answered the question. What are you going to do with all these different Qur'ans? 30 different Qur'ans. Which one is the one in heaven? And that's what Muhammad Hijab is at. Which one is the one in heaven? Which is the one that was revealed to Muhammad? Which is the one that was written down by Uthman in 652? And he could not answer that. And finally, at the very end, he says, they're all the Quran. Talk about academia. They're all the Quran. Does he not even know that there are 93,000 differences between just 23 of those Qurans? Did he just look at two of them, the Warsh and the Hafs? Here's the Warsh. I have the Warsh right here. And here's the Hafs. Just take a look at these two Qurans, Warsh and Hafs. There are 5,000 differences between these two books. Are you suggesting these are both in heaven? That these are both eternal? That these are the two? Which one? Which one did Muhammad actually receive? 5,000 differences. Can you see why he had to put out that video? And that's why he's blaming it on Western academia. These dangerous institutions is what he is saying. That just happened not even a week ago. These dangerous institutions where they do not have this respect for the Quran. Oh, we have a respect for the Quran as long as it passes every test. And that only the Bible has done. All of these academic critiques, redacted criticism. Where do you think redacted criticism was created? It wasn't created on the Bible, but it matured on the Bible. Where do you think source criticism came from? Where do you think literary criticism? Where do you think textual criticism has been applied to? It has it has mostly been applied to the Bible. Only the Bible has passed textual criticism. Now let's ask that question real quickly of these two books right here. Why were these two books chosen? This was chosen in 812. This was chosen, I have it upside down. This was chosen in 796. Did they use any textual criticism to choose either of these two books? Not at all. In order to use textual criticism, you have to open the book and read the words. You have to look at the sentences. You have to see if they agree. Nothing was done to do that. So why did they choose this book? Because the guy named Warsh came from a city called Cairo in Egypt. And that's the only reason they chose him, because he came from Egypt. This guy came from Kufa, and he wrote his in 796. Muhammad died in 632. That's 44 years too late. Nothing was done as far as textual criticism. The academic exercise of textual criticism, source criticism, redacted criticism has completely been eradicated by the scholars today.
My dog is having nightmares at my feet. Hold on.
Is that your dog? See, you must have a Muslim dog there who's having nightmares when he realizes his Quran is being shot to pieces.
I thought Alan was wailing with sadness as you were describing that, Jay. Sorry. Jay,
this whole thing with, let me just finish this down. This whole thing with academic reliability is something that Yasser Qadhi is having a real problem with right now. And you can see why he had a meltdown last Thursday. That's a meltdown. You cannot explain it any other way. For him, he's sitting in two different worlds, and he exemplifies exactly this problem that you're asking. He has to live in the West. He has to live in Houston, where academic credibility is dependent on openness to critical scrutiny. At the same time, he has to also obey and live in the East, where Muhammad Hijab and where 99% of all Muslims come from. He needs to have that kind of credibility. Now, notice in the diatribe against the three of us last Thursday, he never once defended this problem with the Qira'ats, the very thing that we're confronting him on. He never once defended these completely different Qurans. He never even introduced that subject. And so that's the difficulty with almost all Muslims. If you're going to talk about credibility and authority, academic authority, you have got to pass the test that we demand of every scripture and have already demanded of the Bible, and the Bible has won.
Jay, how are the restrictions contain? Obviously, we look in public life and we see the restrictions becoming greater and greater, and what you're allowed to say becoming less and less. And that's now very much in our education system as well, in primary and secondary school. What is it like in that you're coming out with quite radical and new research, but yet it seems as though you're pushing against these huge restrictions on what you're allowed to publish or say? So are you hopeful as you look forward for the academic side actually producing more of the research which you're doing, or do you think that the headwinds will be too much and that will happen less and less?
Yes and no. Let me answer that both ways. And to say yes, I'm going to refer back to what Alan said earlier about the fact that Twitter and Facebook and all these are now moving to the left, and they're restricting anything that's critical. That's going to happen, Alan. That's going to continue. But look, this is the great thing about internet. The great thing about the internet is you have other platforms that you can move to. So if you don't like, if Twitter shuts you down, then you move to Pfander. If Facebook or if the YouTube shuts down, as they are now, they're now starting to shut us down. I've been demonetized now for about a month. David Hutton just got one of her videos struck off a week ago, and she couldn't put anything up for 3 days. She's up to 2 strikes. You get 3 strikes and you're out. Well, you just move to BitChute. So there are other platforms that and this is what's going to happen. More and more of us are going to start moving away from YouTube, away from Twitter, away from Facebook to these other platforms. And more of the crowd's going to follow suit. You always go to where the best material is, to where the newest and also the most exciting material is. And by default, in some ways, the democracy wins in that the greatest number of people, then the greatest number of people, those who will be watching. Take a look at what's happened on the news agencies. Look at the news channels we have here in the United States. Well, we used to have 3 major ones: ABC, CBS, NBC. Then CNN was added to that, and then PBS. 5 news channels that everybody and only anybody would ever watch were those 5 news channels. They were the terrestrial channels plus the 2 cable, 1 cable. Look and see what had happened when they all went to the left. They all moved to the left, to the Democratic side, Democrat side. Fox was then created. Fox became the alternative. How many people watch Fox versus the other 5? Almost equal. Fox gets as many people watching it as the other 5 put together. So you just move with that which you see as being more free, or actually as giving both sides. The thing about Fox News, as much as everybody hates Fox News, whenever I hear people hate Fox News, I ask them, well, what do you watch instead? And they all watch CNN. I said, it's fascinating. Whenever I have watched CNN, I have never seen both positions ever debated. It's always only one position. On Fox News, you get both positions. They bring a Democrat and they bring a Republican, and they ask them to give their material forward, and then the hearer or the watcher can decide which they prefer. And I said, that I would rather have, even though Fox is on the right. Absolutely, it's on the right. It makes no bones about it. Why is it more people are watching Fox than any other news channel? And the same thing is now happening with Pfander. Pfander has already introduced 5 million new accounts in just the last month. Why have 5 million jumped to Pfander? Because they're getting fed up with Twitter. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a movement, and really where the money goes or where the people are. So Fox News is now the richest news agency in the United States, much richer than, in fact, CNN has dropped to 14th place on the cable networks. You can't keep functioning if you don't get money in. So you can see what's going to happen. I don't worry too much, because people are clever enough. People are realize that at least we can move to another platform. So I ask anybody that's listening, if you don't like YouTube, then go to BitChute. If you don't like Twitter, then go to Pfander. and each one of them is now coming up with their own equivalent, and that's why I'm not as negative. I'm not as pessimistic. We are going to have a much bigger channel and much better. I think more and more people are going to hear the truth. Now, on the same token, the thing that bothers me are the academic institutions. You cannot change them overnight. You cannot just create a new Harvard or new Yale or new Princeton or a new any of these. And these old schools have all moved to the left. I think that was very clear when you saw in their when they brought speaker after speaker for their graduation ceremonies. And in almost every case, if the speaker was conservative, they were thrown out. Every conservative speaker was thrown out back in May and June. If that is happening, then how do you change that? How do you move? Well, I think what's going to happen is sooner or later, people are going to stop sending their students. They're going to stop going to those institutions, and other institutions are going to take their place. That's going to take more time. That's, to me, is unfortunate, and that's why, I would say as far as the platforms on the internet, they're going to go much quicker. Listen, we're doing almost all our teaching online now. I do all my teaching online. I don't have to go to any bricks and mortars anymore. There's no reason to use bricks and mortars, to use buildings. I'm doing everything right here from the comfort of my studio, of my office, in my home. And I am all over the world now. This could not have happened 10 years ago. So we have much more of freedom today to be able to circumvent all these restrictions that are being put up against us.
Jay, we're coming towards the end. I just want to come back to the origins. We're talking about Islamophobia, but you for a long time now have been digging around at the fundamentals and undermining the fundamentals of Islam. You and Hatton together. I mean, you aren't just objecting to the violent verses or something like that in the Quran. You're actually saying, you and Hatton between you are saying the Quran is not as Orthodox Islamic belief tells you. It is not a book written in heaven in eternity in Arabic, of which there is only one true copy. You undermine that. You're actually saying that there weren't mosques. You were saying earlier there weren't early mosques facing Mecca. They were facing a place called Petra, which undermines the whole creation, the underlying creation of Islam. There's some question about whether there really was a person called Muhammad, at least whether he started the religion. Can you explain a bit more about that? And also, of all that, this work, and do you think in the long run it will undermine Islam as a religion? More and more people get on board undermining these fundamentals. Do you think in the long run it's the end of Islam?
This is a great question to end off on. Alan, this is the $1 million question, and the whole program should have just been about this question. And I don't have 2 hours. If you want to, I say yes, and then let's look at the last part of your question. If you want to see how we're undermining Islam, both we're looking at it historically as far as how it began. We're looking at who Muhammad was, where Mecca existed, if it even did exist, who these people call Muslims, and where Islam exists. Those 5 areas go up on Pfander Films. They're all up on Pfander Films, Pfander Films. I have been putting them up since June. This year, 2020, has been a landmark year. We have found more material to destroy the historicity of the religion of Islam than any other year in my 40 years of experience, and it's all coming out now. Now, as to your last part of your question, which I think is the most important, and that is, how is it and where is it? Is this Islamophobic? Since the whole program is about Islamophobia, right? And this whole program is about freedom of speech. Am I correct? Let's end with that, because that I think is the most important question you're asking. The debate I had with David Wood about 2 weeks ago on did Muhammad exist? David took the position he did exist. And his only platform to prove that he existed was what we call the principle of embarrassment. Now, before he started, he looked at the camera and he says, I'm arguing for your Muslims. You need to be on my side now because I'm arguing your position. And it was all I could do to keep from laughing when he said that as he looked at the camera. Because what Muslim do you know would ever argue for the principle of embarrassment to support Muhammad? Absolutely none.
What do you mean by the principle of embarrassment?
The things he did were so embarrassing. How could he be made up? Look what he did to Aisha. Look what he did to the people all these myriad of stories that David and Sam Shamoun and Hatun spend their whole careers on. His whole career has been embarrassing Muhammad. Their whole ministry is based on embarrassing Muhammad. I used to be there, Alan. I used to embarrass Muhammad. You've seen me do it at Speaker's Corner. I no longer do that anymore. Why not? Why not? Because the principle of embarrassment is very close to hate speech. It almost borders on hate speech. And legitimately, Muslims are claiming that what David does is hate speech. And I would say, I don't agree with them, but I can see how people, many, especially Christians, are having a hard time defending David on this issue. Or even Hatun. They're having a hard time defending Hatun, holding up that Quran with the holes in it, because that almost borders hate speech, and holding up Muhammad in underwear. He's crying like a baby. That almost borders hate speech. So you can understand why this is going to become more and more difficult for the Hatuns and the David Woods and the Sam Shamoons to do. Because how are they going to defend this? And I know that the only time that I've ever heard David defend this in public, he says, well, Elijah did it, therefore I can do it with the priests of Baal. That's the only example he can do it, because I can't find anywhere in Jesus's ministry or in the early church or Paul's ministry where he mocked those that he was confronting. Mockery, by definition, is in some ways, in some people's viewpoint, is hate speech. Now, saying that, I still think that David and Sam and Hatun and the others who do their whole careers on this must continue to do so. They must have the right to do so because of freedom of speech. Otherwise, we're going to say you cannot mock Jesus. And are we willing to say that? No, please don't. Let them mock Jesus. He stands up to every mockery. But and this comes down to the clincher of what you're talking about. What I do by looking at the historicity of Muhammad, looking at the coins, especially the coins. Those coins are pieces of metal. They don't disintegrate. They don't deteriorate. They are as pristine today as the day they were minted. Look at those coins, and you will see that all the coins from the West are Christian, and all the coins from the East are Zoroastrian. Not one of them is Islamic, all the way up until Abdulmalik. So the coins now are showing us that there was no Islam. These are Arab coins written by Arab rulers. There's no reference to anybody called Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman or Ali on any of these coins. The first recognizable name that we see on any of these coins is not till Muawiyah, and that's 661. That's 30 years after Muhammad, and he is not a Muslim. In the West, he's a Christian. In the East, he's a Zoroastrian. So you can see the very material that we're looking at, the rock inscriptions. The 30,000 rock inscriptions we're now looking at, all of them up until 690, nothing at all about these rock inscriptions written in Arabic, in what we know as Nabatean Aramaic Arabic, which is the same Arabic that we have in the Quran. That Arabic, none of it has to do with Islam. None of it has to do with Islam until after 690. Now, what am I doing? Am I using hate speech here? No. Is what I'm saying, is this perfectly legitimate academically? Yes. Should everybody be using this kind of criticism? Absolutely. How can this be Islamophobic? This doesn't come anywhere close to Islamophobic. I'm talking about names, dates, places, events, and I'm talking about rocks, and I'm talking about coins. And I'm saying, look at the coins, interpret them. Don't look at the 9th and 10th century, what they say. Look and see the evidence that's on the ground there in the 7th century. That is not hate speech. That's nothing to do with Islamophobia. I can therefore continue to do what I'm doing. And if they want to take me to court, if they want to say that I'm in hate speech, I say, well, let me show you the material that this is the hate speech. Let's look at it again. And I'll get another time to reintroduce the coins and the rock inscriptions and the Nabatean Arabic, and I'll look at the Qiblas, and I'll look at all these 25 to 30 arguments that we've come up with already. Every one of them are based on historical criticism, which is as neutral as you can get. And notice everything that I have said about what I have introduced has nothing to do with me as a Christian. There's nothing that I am saying that's a Christian about it until, of course, I then say, let's ask the same question of the Bible. Then I'm being neutral. I'm saying I'm going to demand the same thing. I'm going to ask whether or not there's any artifacts from the 1st century that dispute the existence of Jesus Christ, any artifacts that dispute whether there's a city called Jerusalem or that he died on the cross. I'm going to look at artifacts. I'm going to look at writings. I'm going to look at inscriptions. I'm going to look at coins. I'm going to do the exact same thing to Jesus that I have just done with Muhammad. And that's like with like. And it is as academic as you can get. And it is exactly what everybody wants. Now, let me just say one thing, though. When I left Speaker's Corner in 2017, after I was introducing all this new material on the manuscripts, the last person that said goodbye to me was an atheist. He was in tears. And he said, Jay, why are you leaving? We need you here. I said, what do you mean you need me here? He says, you're the first Christian we have met that's speaking our language. I said, what language are you talking about? He says, we're tired and sick and tired of you Christians always giving us your testimony. We don't care diddly about your testimony, because what God does for you is not what he's doing for me. But you don't talk about your testimony. You don't even talk about what Jesus is saying. You're just saying you're actually answering the question we're asking. We're asking a very simple question, and that is it true? 3 words. Is it true? And you're defending and confronting the Quran, and you're defending the Bible, you're confronting Muhammad, and you're defending Jesus Christ by answering those 3 questions using historical criticism. He says, now you're the first one that makes sense to us. We need you here to use your material. And I turned to him and I said, no. This is not for you. Please don't use this material. Because I'm confronting the Quran with the intention that I also confront the Bible simultaneously. You can't do that. I'm confronting Muhammad with the intention that I'm also providing the defense for Jesus Christ simultaneously. You can't do that. I'm confronting Allah with the intention that I'm supporting and I'm defending Yahweh. And I don't want you to destroy their God, to destroy their book, to destroy their Jesus, unless you have something to provide them. You have nothing to provide them. You have no antidote. You have no answer. Christians are the only ones that have an answer to every one of these criticisms. That's why it should be us. It should be you, Peter. It should be you, Alan, who is actually Alan and Peter. You are the ones who need to be using this material. Everybody that's watching us, it should be Christians, because first and foremost, we know this debate better than anybody because we've had it thrown against us for the last 200 years. Secondly, we're the only ones that have come up with an answer to it, and therefore we're the only ones that have an antidote for it, and therefore we're the only ones that I do not want to destroy these Muslims' faith in God or in Revelation or in Jesus Christ. I want to bring them home. I want to bring them home. And I can't think of a better way, answering your last question, I can't think of a better way to bring them home than to provide them with the only piece of evidence that's passed every test. And the only piece of evidence that's passed every test is this right here, the Bible. This is the only book, this is the only man, this is the only God that has had everything thrown at it and has come up roses. Whereas this book here has not even passed one of those tests. Can you then understand why I always say the bigger the better book? I always keep it bigger for that reason. The bigger the better book is the only book that I want to give to Islam, because it is the only answer. It is the only antidote. It is the only alternative. Come on. Come on home, Muslims. Come on home to Jesus Christ.
On that, I think we will bring it to a close on that end. And Jay, we'll have to look at, we have talked about, we'd love to highlight some of your research, and maybe we can look at doing some specific programs on that. We'll discuss that, but it's fascinating what you're doing, and most of us do not understand that academic research side. That's not generally in the media that we read, so it'll be good to maybe take a few of those and unpack them a little bit with you, but we'll discuss that later and see what we can do into the new year. So okay. Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you.
God bless you. Indeed, Jay. Very good.
Hang on, Jay. We'll just say bye to our viewers, but hang on at the end. I want to encourage our viewers that we have had you on twice before, and in case I saw some new people on the chat. If you haven't seen Jay before, want to find out more of his stuff, then it's there just on the bottom of the screen. Pfander Films, Pfander Films. You can type that in and you can find those videos on YouTube and other platforms. I know that we have just uploaded all our videos up to BitChute and Rumble, which is Rumble is a new video sharing platform which is connected with Parler. So we've just uploaded everything onto that. And then I just learned the other day that brand YouTube, which is another one, just has a live streaming capability, something that Rumble does not have yet. So we may look at exploring that. And I just saw that, again, just over 10% of you watch on VK. So again, we are beginning to make use of those other platforms. So that's good to see. And make sure and sign up to Rumble or BitChute if you haven't already. The links are in the description, and you can check out all our videos and share where there are no restrictions. We had our first video taken down on Friday on discussing COVID. So not on Islam, but on COVID. So you can get the video that was taken down, we put up on Rumble. It's available for you. So what do we have coming up there? On Thursday, we have Gerard Batten. Once again, you really enjoyed The Week According to Gerard on Saturday. And on Thursday, he wanted to share a paper that he has come across, which is the World Economic Forum published a white paper last month entitled Resetting the Future of Work Agenda, Disruption and Renewal in a Post-COVID World. And this paper has alarmed Gerard with how it wants to change a lot of areas in how we function in society. So we'll be going through that. It's a 27-page, so it's not a very large paper, but Gerard will be coming on Thursday and discussing his concerns of this and what lies behind and what the World Economic Forum are driving as they put forward a new vision for how we engage and function together as a society. So tune in for that on Thursday. Gerard is never shy on giving his opinions, so don't worry on that. Tune in, put your comments, and we'll also try and answer some of those comments. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions on this, so come on at 8 o'clock on Thursday, put your comments down, and we'll try and answer those, or I'll let Gerard answer them. So yes, good to see you on there. I think that's about it. As I said, I'll get that video of Tommy outside course up in about half an hour, 40 minutes maybe. So that'll be up on Rumble, on YouTube, and anywhere else you can find us. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thank you for liking the videos. And once again, I point you towards Pfander Films to see a lot more of what Jay is doing and those debates he is having. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you very much indeed, Jay. Thank you. Thank you.
God bless.
And we'll see you, our viewers, on Thursday. So thank you very much.